there's a fine line when that stuff comes across as being almost disrespectful or can offend. And I think
it becomes cliche if they're trying too hard without understanding the cultural nuances.
Yeah, absolutely.
China's working on its Made in China 2025 push.
The US is playing with fire, but China has fire too.
Global economic powerhouse.
Young Chinese people are becoming disillusioned with everyday life.
China has mobile payment,
cashless.
a cashless society. All use QR codes.
China. People think I don't like China. I love China.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of China What's the Future. We've been wanting to do this show for a long time. We want to talk about football fans and how to reach and engage with them. We've been extremely busy in the agency, but we finally managed to get hold of Tom and Sean on the show. Tom is the co-founder of Qumin, and Sean is a registered football agent with the FA, I believe, and now helping us to engage with more football clubs. Do you guys want to introduce yourself to the audience quickly, Tom?
Yeah, sure. Cool. Thanks for the intro, Arnold. So we've been working now, I guess, for the last four or 5 years with football clubs in China, actually starting with Manchester United. Big fan myself. Before I went to China to study Chinese when I was very young, I actually did all of my FA coaching badges, and the purpose was to go to China and coach football. That was about, I guess, just a little like 12 years ago now. At that time, there were no Chinese owners of any European sports teams. There were no international superstars playing in China in the Football League. And there definitely weren't over 300 million Chinese football fans. I can remember the facilities and the interest in football being pretty low, actually, when I first got there. So finally, at Qumin, I've got now the ability with the passion I have for Chinese, but also with marketing and football to kind of put those all together. And we've been working on some pretty awesome stuff over the last few years for Man United, West Brom, Watford, and yeah, hoping to kind of share some of those insights today.
Thanks, Tom. Sean?
Yeah, so I graduated 2015, and since then, sort of the rise of Chinese football has been very apparent. And I've sort of, as Tom, I've used my Mandarin skills, I've used my experience living in China, and I've built very strong relationships with the Chinese Super League teams, players, managers, sort of connected the Premier League to the Chinese Super League. And, you know, it's really incredible to take, let's take one example, for example, Nico Linares, played at Brentford, played at Arsenal before. He had Chinese grandparents.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, he's become the first neutralized Western player to play for the Chinese national team. So it's like very big news in China. He plays for a team called Beijing Guoan. They're a very, very big fan base in China. And another example, Elkerson, Brazilian player playing in the Chinese Super League. He's been in China 5 years. So there's a rule, if you live in China 5 years, he could get Chinese citizenship. So Xi Jinping and the Chinese government are really trying to bolster the Chinese team, getting Nico Linares, getting Elkerson to try compete for the qualifiers. You know, that's their aim, to try be in the World Cup. So really, really incredible examples.
Yeah, I think another good example of how things have kind of shifted over the last few years is that Premier League match ball that we've got a few years back. It's actually signed by Salomon Rondon.
Oh, wow.
Who, was it this season he joined? Was it Dalian?
Dalian Yifan, yes. So he's actually partnered up with Rafa Benitez. Rafa, as Rafa when they was like, I'm taking Rondon from Newcastle.
Yeah.
And we got this ball from when he was playing West Brom.
West Brom, yeah.
Just quickly, before we move on to the kind of main content, we'll be going through 3 specific points. I guess it applies to everything in marketing, but I think for Chinese football fans, it's very relevant because it feels like a lot of times Western clubs haven't really made a specific effort to create content, engage with Chinese fans. A lot of what we've seen over the last couple of years has been very... it feels like it's just kind of translated. It feels very effortless. So we'll be starting with people, as with all of our podcasts. So we'll be looking at Chinese football fans specifically, and within this, we will be looking at 3 pillars, and they are recognition, entertainment, and respect. And then finally, we'll be looking at marketing overall and how we can reach and engage with Chinese football audience. Again, looking at 3 pillars of reaction, reach, and resonance. Before we start, And we normally do this, but I think we've actually forgotten to do it over the last couple of episodes. And I know Tom's got some amazing stories, and Sean, you as well. So, Tom, do you guys just mind telling our audience about your China stories, kind of how you got involved in China, and I think, Tom, specifically for you, what people around you thought about it when you told them that you wanted to learn Chinese?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I do have a lot of stories. That's true. So I was very young, probably about 13, and one of my best friends at school was Chinese, and his dad was actually based in Oxford doing an MBA, and I was very fascinated and also quite competitive at that age.
No.
Yeah, well, still am. So I was quite competitive that in our maths class, this is so nerdy, he was actually better than me at maths, like, I guess, using that stereotype of most Asians being better than us at maths. And I had a bit of a competition going with him, and I said, look, one day I'll be better at Chinese than you, as a joke. And then my mum decided, when he actually left the UK, because his dad got posted to Central America, actually, and she signed me up for evening classes to do Chinese. And I kind of fell in love with studying the language and studying more about the culture. And at that point, I was kind of made that decision. I was going to go to university and do Chinese, and tallying people. I always enjoyed that kind of look on their face of one, you'd get some people in the know, because Oxford's, there's a kind of good mix of people that understand where the world economy is going, and they'll go, oh wow, you're going to be so rich. Just to let,
still waiting for that day to happen.
Just to let all those people know that told me I was going to be so rich 15 years ago. Well, yeah, delayed gratification, I think, because that's definitely not happened. And then also people that were, very kind of shocked and would say, what are you going to do with Chinese? Open a Chinese takeaway. Which again, might actually happen. I think I run a pretty good takeaway.
We love food concepts here, Qumin.
Yeah. So with those kind of different viewpoints, what was kind of very apparent from a young age was that no one really understood China or what China was, or even Chinese people, because there were just these cliches about them being operators of fast food places, really good at maths, or this big power that was coming, but no one really kind of knew what to do when it was going to get here. So that was kind of my introduction to kind of learning Chinese. So it's always been fascinating for me to work in research and insights, and then actually marketing, because we have the ability now to take a lot of those preconceptions, people's sort of cultural biases sometimes towards certain things, and change their mindset through great creative,
and almost use that as the catalyst for the creative to kind of change the way people feel about China, and the way people think about China.
Absolutely. And I think we get on to talking about some of the work we've done, especially with Man United, but all marketing is kind of based on pulling out those human truths, cultural truths, and then intermersing in between them the brand truth or the product truth. So that, for me, learning about how to do that for a Chinese market is it's been fascinating.
Exciting. Thank you, Tom. Fascinating. You were way ahead of the curve, actually.
He was.
Yeah. Sean?
To be honest, when I went to China, I thought, I'm the first one going there. And, to see someone,
see someone like Tom for 10 years.
it's unbelievable. Like Tom's experience.
Well, when I was at university, I used to look at my lectures and go, I can't believe you lived here in the 70s. Like, China in the 70s, China in the 80s, 90s. I mean,
imagine going through that as a foreigner.
Yeah.
Must be crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my first experience of China, I was 15. I went to Beijing. Yeah, it was during the time China and Africa were really growing together, stronger, for the mining industry, commodities. So I went to Beijing at 15. It was a very intense experience, the only foreigner in China Railway, a very big state-owned company. And that was my first taste of China. It was incredible. And then I decided to do a university. I lived in Ningbo for 1 year, which was really great.
What was that like? Because Ningbo is not, for the benefit of audience, is not like a big tier 1, tier 2 city.
2 hours from Shanghai, and it's, it's really quite industrial and nothing really to do there. But that was the best way to do it, to learn the language, to immerse yourself. And, I wouldn't change it now. Of course, it was difficult at the time, but it gives you a good, to sacrifice stuff. It puts you in
because
good
you don't
stead.
get the fallback. If you live in Shanghai, you have the
lazy.
fallback of hanging out with foreigners and speaking English.
I used to take a train to Shanghai to eat hummus.
I love hummus.
Genuinely, like because same thing, living in Nanjing, you only had a certain amount of sort of your Western comforts, right? Especially
access,
food comforts.
yeah.
So the big thing that I missed the most, oh god, it sounds so Oxford, don't I?
Was
missing it hummus. Cheese and hummus. And I was very disappointed with the quality of the bacon. So if there's any entrepreneurs out there, don't open a Chinese marketing agency. There's enough of those. Please focus on making good bacon for the Chinese market, because it's all American, streaky stuff.
So then I started working in football and fashion. You know, I saw that sort of the Chinese government had a bit of a change. They said a no to a few industries, they blocked a few, but as we know, the main ones they focus on is football and fashion. And that's why it's so incredible being at Qumin. You're able to resonate with people and open up Western brands for the fashion and football industry, which is like the two big ones Xi Jinping and the government want to focus on. So we're really in the right place at the right time.
Thank you, Sean. I guess that's a nice place to lead on to talking about Chinese people and Chinese cultures. And that's how we start with most of our podcasts. So first of all, we want to talk about reaction to do with Chinese football fans. And Tom, I know you have a lot of interesting insights on this topic.
Yeah. So I think an easy analogy to imagine when it comes to Chinese, you can say sports fans, because I don't think it's just relevant to football, is that imagine you've been stranded on a desert island for, let's say, a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. You begin to forget what food tastes like, in a way, right? So you the minute you get off that island and somebody gives you some tomato ketchup, it's the saltiest, sweetest thing that you've ever eaten, and it's incredible.
I wouldn't have tomato ketchup alone.
But after... cheers.
Without anything, just tomato ketchup. It's the worst.
But after a few weeks of eating, like sweet things, salty things, you begin to become, your palate becomes acclimatized to that. And you want, stronger flavors, right? Over time. And that's the thing with China and what I see as football content. It began very much with an emergence of lots of very fervent football fans interested in the Premier League, and a couple of the other big leagues. Serie A are in there from I think they're the first actually to broadcast in China, Bundesliga, and there became some very, very strong overseas football fans, not just in China but across the world, across Asia. This isn't just a problem for China. So then with all of this sort of big fan bases, it was very important for clubs to begin to engage with those fan bases, because they were driving a lot of the commercial aspects of the business. But the way to approach that content was, well, why don't we just localize it for the Chinese market, i.e. translate it, or localize it for Indonesia, and we'll just translate it. And so the clubs began to just translate content. And that was fine for a certain period of time. Everyone was like, oh, wow, yeah, we're finally being appreciated. There's content in our language. And then from there evolved, I guess, a whole media industry around sports. And again, not a sophisticated industry, relatively new one. And at the same time, China went through this huge rise in sort of digital platforms, digital engagements. So a lot of the time, people that were translating this content were playing catch up of how to actually engage with people on the channels, but they were just merely distributing content onto these channels. And that content, to a point, just became very stale and quite bland. So then Chinese football fans wanted something more. So they started to look in other places. And then you had the emergence of other platforms, like football-focused platforms. Sean, I know you use Dongchodi, for example. And then we're now at the point where all of these fans in China are looking for, ways that clubs or football brands are producing content that they feel is actually, honest and authentic. And that's where we can kind of look at these three aspects of sort of reach, resonance, and how we're actually showing respect to a Chinese fan, how we're entertaining a Chinese fan, and how we're recognizing the Chinese fan. So examples where, you'll have a specific Chinese focused competition, you're clearly demonstrating that you're recognizing that there are fans in China.
For what they would want.
What they would want. So you might have a Man United have a partnership with Luhan, the Chinese celebrity. So those kind of things are showing. Actually, we know we're engaging in the Chinese market. We have these Chinese brand ambassadors. You could win signed Man United shirts, for example, like the one on the wall we've got. And all of that is showing that we're doing things actually for a Chinese fan. But sometimes there's a fine line when that stuff comes across as being almost disrespectful or can offend. And I think it
becomes cliche if they're trying too hard without understanding the cultural nuances.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have, I mean, the recent tour. So this summer was like it was crazy. There were so many Western football clubs actually in China.
The Premier League Asia Trophy.
Yeah, and like everyone had their own activities and marketing activities going on, and there was actually a little bit of backlash towards Manchester City. Although they tend to do some really nice content, I've seen some really great content that they put out. They actually, there were a few things where just got picked up by media and created stories that they're actually disrespecting Chinese fans for not being in certain places long enough or not engaging enough on the ground. And I think everyone in China now recognizes that they are effectively being seen by Western clubs as pound signs. And that's always the exchange you get between brands and consumers. But when it becomes too overt, it becomes disrespectful. And that's when, if you're not on the right side of that line, it's definitely in China where nationalism is so strong, you can offend quite easily.
And especially the fans that they have no patience, really. I mean, you see in the Chinese Super League managers, if they don't win 3 games, they're out.
Wow.
You saw the Watford manager that was just appointed, Flores. He was in Shanghai Shenhua. They signed Igalo because him and Igalo were at Watford together before, so they thought it's a good idea. Shanghai Shenhua, one of the biggest teams in China, very followed, huge fan base. He lost about 3-4 games. He's out. He's back at Watford now. Pellegrini, the same. Hebei China Fortune, fired. Chris Coleman, Hebei China Fortune, few games fired. The fans there, you need to show you're invested in them, It's the same with players, managers, and teams. Because if you're not, like Carlos Tevez went there, thought it was like dollar signs, kicked out. Gus Poyet, the same, If you want to have long-term success in China with any business players, you have to invest in it. You have to immerse yourself.
It's almost, that's kind of like, again, we've said this before, I think that's probably the downside of the fact that China has grown so far socioeconomically over the last kind of few decades, that people are just less patient. Like there's fast adaptation, which is great for technology, for innovation, but it also means people get onto things and kind of like get disinterested very quickly as well. So you've got to be very impactful, very explosive, as we've done with a lot of our campaigns for Man United. Okay, so there are essentially 3 things when it comes to Chinese football fans. And again, Tom, I know you talk about this a lot. They are reach, resonance, and reaction. Do you want to give our audience a quick explanation of what you mean by these 3 points?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of the time when I go to football clubs and I kind of talk to them about China marketing strategy, first one is how do you get as many people in China to be aware of your content or of your brand? And largely, the majority of the hardcore football fans know every club in the Premier League because they're proper true fans of the Premier League. So a lot of the time, it's just about creating those platforms and putting ourselves out there. But because of the shape of a lot of these platforms now, how they've moved from organic to paid, actually getting reach can, on certain platforms, can be quite tough. On other platforms, it's super easy, as we know from some of the campaigns that we've done. So
Douyin when you said that, by the way, in case anyone.
So over the years, I think we've done a lot of work whenever we've run campaigns, and we've been very fortunate enough to work with clubs like United that have the biggest reach in China. It's phenomenal. I think 9 million fans on Sina Weibo. And they actually, has been reports they have 100 million plus fans in China. So whenever there's a campaign, automatically you think, it's going to get huge reach, but actually it still needs a lot of activity to kind of get it out there. So there are tactics that can be deployed to achieve that reach. Now, there's no point in spending money or time or investment trying to put yourself out there and reach fans unless what you're going to say is going to really move them to do the thing you want them to do. And that's where you have resonance and reaction. So resonance is very much, now there's two types of examples I like to give. There's kind of content that that could kind of people will engage with, but it doesn't actually resonate them to kind of do something. So an example might be, and this is where people think that in China it's very easy to create Chinese content. So for Chinese New Year, let's just go and film like the players doing some Chinese calligraphy, or dress them up in some traditional Chinese outfits and get them to sit around a table eating Chinese New Year dinner. Like a lot of that stuff, frankly, is verging on that side of being offensive, a little bit orientalist.
And it comes from a good place, I guess.
Yeah. The people go into it going, oh yeah, we're going to create this Chinese content. But you go to China, people don't wear traditional Chinese outfits, like walking around the street. When I was giving this talk in Beijing, I gave an example to, there was a guy there from Ajax, and I said to him, you getting the Ajax players to dress up in traditional Chinese outfits and speak Chinese is like if I signed for Ajax and rocked up to the press interview wearing clogs with some tulips and speaking a little bit like this, people would go,
Not Al Pacino.
What? That's definitely not Al Pacino. I was doing my Steve McLaren. So people would say, what the hell, right?
You're taking the piss.
It's like it's racist stereotypes, and so what actually people mean is that feels relevant. Kind of, it is Chinese, and it's got some calligraphy on it, on that, red packets, all that kind of thing. But actually, does it resonate with people? And that's when it's like drilling into the cultures, and it doesn't need to necessarily be super sort of like niche subcultural kind of things. But actually in China, there's very big areas of interest. So like we know, like gaming, for example, is a big one. Rap music has become very big in China, which is, doing things in those spaces are ways that you can create content, authentic content that kind of resonates people.
It's really interesting you say that. It almost feels like it's obvious, right? So instead of like going straight in for the stereotypes, you actually look at what people are interested, what their vertical interests are. Like it's basic marketing everywhere, and we said this a lot between ourselves as well. We feel like the stuff you were saying, it's true. It's like dressing up in traditional Chinese outfits, speaking Chinese. These things are relevant to the Chinese audience, but in today's marketing, it almost feels like being relevant is a lazy version of creating something that genuinely resonates and feels like it comes from within the community rather than the brand just talking at the audience it's speaking to.
I mean, you could take Adidas football, right, as a big example. Adidas have a certain number of clubs that they invest a lot of money into and use the brand of these clubs to help propel the brand of Adidas football. And football is now the biggest market. China is now the biggest market for football in the world, and Adidas football is that's a key market for them. So Sean's a big Arsenal fan, and there was a launch campaign that went out in the summer. Fantastic intro video using like London icons, celebrities, big Arsenal fans, to kind of really build that brand story of Arsenal as this London-based club, and London being this place of energy, of inclusivity, and those are kind of values that Adidas football wanted to kind of show the world. But because all the icons in there were very much known and recognized by people in the UK, it would miss the mark internationally because people won't know who some of these like grime artists are or things like that. So actually because China is their biggest market, that piece of content just won't work for China, and they can't just subtitle it in Chinese.
Funny enough that there was a bit of Chinese in it, like when Tony Adams was speaking in Chinese, but
exactly, yeah. So they
knew,
and they're trying to feed it in, and subsequently they're going to need to do a lot more to kind of build those connections. And
They feel like an afterthought. They were trying to wedge something in for the Chinese audience rather than something that...
Yeah, China would have been on the brief, on the agency brief, and
they were just like, let's get someone speaking Chinese.
Yeah, and there's no, yeah, and I think that's an example of they're kind of recognizing, they're showing a bit of respect to the Chinese audience by not ignoring them. So they did all the right things, and I thought it was a great campaign. But long term, they just need to build on that and kind of create those pillars, and that will get the reaction. And the one thing that you when you're doing the strategy of the club is, what do you want that reaction to be? And so one of the key things that we did with United was building out their marketable record database, their CRM, because that's where you get a lot of value as a club. It's how many people that you have sort of in your database that you can then go to sponsors and say, how can I as a sponsor work on my marketing campaigns in collaboration with the club and activate with your audience to sell my product. And in China, I guess, and everywhere now, there's that difficulty in the sports sponsorship market where people are looking at the reach that they can get from sponsoring a football club and the cost of doing that, and the reach that they could get if they took that same amount of money and spent it on programmatic advertising. They're going to get more ROI probably on programmatic in terms of short-term conversions, and a lot of time, because of the length at which Chinese CMOs stay in their jobs, short term is definitely on top of their priority list.
Certainly more attributable and trackable ROI.
Yeah, but then I guess the flip side is that long term you should be brand building, and that's the thing I think where we're kind of converging now in this world of sports marketing or football marketing, which is only really become a little bit more sophisticated in the last 3 or 4 years, certainly in the West. Then you've got Chinese marketing, which again we believe is not as sophisticated as it could be, and it's still under development. And then there's all the issues that happen within Chinese marketing, and that's kind of like converging now on where everybody's recognizing the importance of China, and they know they need to get these reactions. To build these databases, to build value, to build their commerciality. But at the same time, the companies that can provide them with those services have not been doing that work for very long. And from my view, are just taking a very simplistic approach to doing marketing, which is translation or just being a little bit, I guess it's not laziness. It's just safe, right? Safe and doing things in a way that they think will get likes or followers. So we talked a bit about content that we've started looking at some of the clubs, some of the Premier League clubs in the UK, and some of it reminds us of Soccer AM 10 years ago. Ladies in short skirts presenting TV shows. I mean,
telling cheesy jokes.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus, like that is just so far beyond where we've come as a, I think the UK is kind of leading a lot of this, equality and things. But
that's probably largely because they're still, you said earlier, they're still relatively immature in the way that they produce this content and the way that they just execute marketing in general, right? What you said earlier, it was like what we did in UK 10 years ago. So do you think in 10 years time, or maybe even faster, because they can learn from the benefit of the experience of UK marketers, that Chinese football marketing or sports marketing in general will evolve out of that very quickly?
Yeah, I think it comes down to really having a good client, if I'm completely honest, because the best work that we've done as a business has largely been because the clients want to do that work.
Yeah, I agree. 100%.
Like we've had lots of football briefs over the years, which have just kind of, made me despair a little bit about the future, because they're just take this, localize it. Like that's not a marketing brief. That's a translation. Use a translation company. Yeah. Don't go to a marketing agency, right? So if they come and say, I want to build a brand. I mean, the brief that we had from Watford, one of the best briefs.
One of the best briefs.
Honestly, I was smiling for like days when we got that brief, because it's like, I get it. And
it was so exciting for us to be able to answer a brief like that.
It aligned perfectly with Qumin.
Yeah.
They want to build themselves as an entertainment brand, and a brand. I mean, the fact that brand is even in the brief is fantastic. So when in China, a lot of the pressure we know comes from marketing directors or marketing managers, and it's about metrics, about numbers, which has then led to all the fake engagements, the fake likes, and yes, that's rife in the football world as well. But until those marketing managers or marketing directors, both on the Chinese side and on club side, say we want to actually see reaction at the end in terms of building a database, we want to see people engaging with that content, and we want to create content that moves people beyond just getting the cheap followers and the cheap likes. But because at the moment all sponsorship is kind of measured on how many social media followers do I have, and we're going through this whole thing in the West where we're like, actually, does it matter how many Instagram followers you have? Whereas, in China, everyone's still trying to measure themselves on just pure numbers.
Yeah, exactly. It's more about how many people you've actually built a meaningful relationship with, rather than just how many people that are following you.
Yeah.
And we've had experience of that previously, working with a club where they would have huge amount of followers, but literally hardly any of them would actually interact when we would have a CRM activation.
Yeah, that was quite interesting because we did a lot of the data analytics, data tracking.
Yeah.
And we measured which platforms worked well and which ones didn't. And really, I think the platforms that are going to work best and can demonstrate commercial return are some of the newer ones. We were on Douyin the other day, and I'm not like it's just going to keep promoting Douyin all the time, but they've kind of been working on that ecosystem where it goes from something that's quite engaging in terms of a creative format to suddenly then you can go and click through and be instantly in an e-commerce site. And it's a much smoother journey than, let's say, a Weibo journey, which is still feels they feel a little bit lost about what content they're kind of providing their audience, and you still have to pay to play to kind of be targeted by that. And
Weibo, like Instagram and Facebook, is a platform where you can't get followers, you can't get reach anymore outside your followers. Very difficult organically. Whereas Douyin is a platform where you can still relatively easily get reach outside of your following base, essentially. Yeah. I think this is a really good point in time for you to summarize, maybe for our audience. Try in under 2 minutes, Tom. What you said about reach, resonance, reaction, which I think is really interesting for our listeners.
Yeah. So reach is the ability for a football club to get as many eyeballs on their content as possible. And the challenges within that are the types of platforms that you set yourselves up on, how much exposure you can get through organic growth, and where you can to earn that growth, and where you have to actually pay to play. And I would say there's 3 platforms that you need to primarily look at as your sort of open top of the funnel and getting as much awareness, and that would be Douyin, Weibo, and WeChat.
In that order?
Probably, yeah, definitely in that order in terms of maximum reach. And then in terms of getting that sort of resonance, it's about focusing on content that's built on understanding the consumer truths, what's happening in the market with the consumers and the fans. What do they really want? What kind of content do they want to consume? Understanding culturally what's happening in China. What are the interest pillars? So whether it's music, whether it's fashion, design, trying to move football into other territories, because Chinese football fans are not like us in the West. They have other interests, they consume other media, and then creating content that is actually, not trying to get cheap likes, but actually kind of creating emotional connection, and is built on the brand ethos of that particular club, and that then should see reaction at the end, and you want to basically be measuring that reaction, I think, from a commercial point of view in terms of sales, subscription to fan clubs, looking at CRM records that you can then later monetize, and that will be able to create a nice funnel where you're actually measuring your ROI.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was really insightful, and I think it's a really good summary of the 3 points that we were discussing earlier about how the best ways to reach and engage with Chinese football fans. You mentioned briefly earlier about our Man United campaign. I think on top of the Watford brief, that was another example of a fantastic brief from a client which enabled great work. Could you give our audience a quick summary of the work and what we did there?
Yeah, sure. So for some time, the CRM team at United had been wanting to grow the marketable record database in China, and the difficulty had come from the fact that they often these teams, they use these apps that they distribute on through these channels that effectively are sort of like gamified apps where you can go and you can engage with like a little quiz, and then you have the potential to win a signed shirt. But the exchange is always your marketable record. Now in China, these apps that they were using in the West on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, they just didn't work because there wasn't an equivalent. So our original brief for United was actually to build on these applications. But then after distributing these to the platforms, what we found was we were just collecting the same records that we'd already got. So it became very saturated. So we needed to go and get new marketable records. And our strategy to do that was to move away from just purely going after a football audience. And United kind of gave us the kind of brief to tap into what is the cultural insight right now in China and to what young people are doing around consuming football. And what we kind of looked at is obviously late at night. It's largely when the Premier League is kind of watched in China, or if you're watching the Champions League match, it'll be 3 a.m. And so what were young Chinese people doing at the same time? We found out that actually while watching football, they were also gaming. And gaming is an incredible phenomenon in China. When we think of gaming, we think of the guys at home on the PlayStations and things. But in China, like it's almost organized a lot of the time into these huge internet cafes, which I used to love going to when I lived in China.
Me too. I remember those.
They're so much fun. And they would be there, instant messaging, gaming, reading manga, but then also watching football and talking about football with their friends. So we were like, if we want to truly show the Chinese audience that how much we respect them, why don't we create something made for them, it's made for China, but also something that was, I guess, made for social, in a format that Chinese people would love. And so we kind of honed in on this kind of concept of manga. So we wanted to create an authentic piece of manga for the Chinese audience that kind of created this story that we knew would resonate with them. So we actually tapped into a lot of the insights around a lot of the pressures that people, social, economic, we talk about the cultural transformation. Cultural transformation is fantastic for China as a whole, but there's a lot of people that get left behind in that growth, and a lot of disenfranchised youth. Which is feels very relevant to the UK population at the moment, and so we wanted to create a story that would connect with them, but also one of the great parts of Manchester United as a club is they've always got this sort of like never say die ethos to everything that they have in the club. They've been through some pretty traumatic and horrific things in their history, but they've still come through it at the end, and fighting to the end of the matches is kind of a representation on the pitch of what the club has as its kind of core ethos. So we wanted to bring that through in this story. And again, we didn't want to try to get our guys in the office and necessarily try to create something that didn't feel authentic. So we went out there, we found writers and manga artists from China, and we crafted this story that started off, I think, was going to be quite simple and short, but became something that was almost a passion project for us, and there were at the end thousands of frames of animation, and at the end we had this kind of great piece of interactive sort of data capture, where it was a sort of gamified story that had different routes depending on what outcomes or what options you chose at various points of the story, and then integrated data capture at the beginning in kind of like a staggered way, which then impacted some of the parts of the story as well. But at the end of it, we had this incredible piece of content, but we still needed to get it out there.
Yeah.
Because you can't just put it on the Man United channels and hope it's going to get engagement, because We
and our
tried that
experience was
before.
that we weren't getting engagement really.
No, we
were
weren't
putting
getting
things out.
engagement we would have wanted on those channels. So we then had to kind of reach out to the other verticals, which are more than happy to kind of promote this stuff because they'd never seen anything like it before. To them, it was, it was very original. It was actually manga content that would have been almost recognized and applauded by the hardcore manga people. So we actually had audiences that were saying this is a great piece of manga, not this is a great piece of Man United content. So they were saying it's a great piece of manga. Then we would go to the football fans, any football fan in China, and they would say this is a great piece of football content. And then we had the Man United fans that would say it's a great piece of Man United content. So initially, although we were only talking to a audience that was Man United based, we then were able to talk to all football fans and then all manga fans, which opened up a huge audience base to us. And we were very fortunate that we were kind of given the remit to do that. And we also, we won a lot of plaudits and got some awards.
You were nominated for about 4 or 5 different awards.
The Beamer most
Only
recently,
one so far.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. I just want to quickly kind of interject and summarize a little bit because we get a lot of questions where people asking us, how do we succeed as a brand in China? And specifically for football, this probably applies for pretty much every industry, but I think specifically for football, just because, as you were saying earlier, a lot of the content seems very sterile or very translated, almost kind of like a little bit, it's not exciting, right? It's not exciting stuff, where some of the other industries have started doing more exciting stuff. So I think for us to succeed as a football club, and again, this probably applies to everything, that you really need to start with the creative first. And I think in this age of data-driven marketing, a lot of times that people forget the people, the culture that lead on to the insights, which then creates great creative, is more important than anything else. Like you said earlier, because our creative tapped into the verticals of manga and gaming, we were able to recruit fans from those verticals without just relying on hardcore pure football fans. And then once you have the creative, you interlace, you go back to the technology, you go back to the technology, you go back to CRM, then you can interlace the data capture and the CRM elements back into the creative. And it feels more natural, it feels less forced. I think that's, if you take anything away, that's one of the points that you should really think about as a football club when you're entering China. For the Man United campaign, a lot of our target audience were the kind of Chinese youths, millennials and Gen Z. And that's a big growing football audience in China. A lot of clubs like Watford have recognized that, and they are actively trying to engage with that audience. Sean, you've been in China for quite a long time, and you're very familiar with the football industry and the football fans. Do you think you give us a introduction of the Gen Z and millennial audience in China, and what you think they're kind of how do you think they engage with Western football clubs, on what platforms they normally watch football, and how do they consume media in relation to football?
Yeah, I just want to first say, like, working at Qumin, I joined in June, and it's a perfect place to understand, as you said, not just football fans, because the people we target in the football teams or the fashion industries, it's the same Gen Z, millennial, Chinese demographic. And
that's a good point.
And that's the key to target. For example, campaigns we've done for Harrods or Heathrow or Manchester United, it's that same group of people. As you said, China's changing very fast. So it's those people we need to capture.
That's a good point.
And in terms of football, the platforms I love using is Douyin. It actually competes and it betters Western platforms. It's so interactive, the fan community, the fan forums, the live match updates. It's incredible how in tune it is, So Chinese, they're really, really increasingly getting better. Also, Douyin, you talked a lot about the short video platforms. It's incredible. It's so interactive. So it's really amazing. And the Gen Z, to come back to, we looked at for the Watford proposal we did, and all the research we did into that. It's incredible how from football you can do cross industry collaboration. So it might be a football brand, but we can go into fashion, we can go into rap culture, as Tom said. It's incredible how the market in China is changing, and it's important to capitalize on that. You know, most brands just think of China as a whole. Oh, we need to go to China, but you need to look deeper than that.
It's the fact that you have to go a lot deeper, I think, gives you the opportunity to be more brave. And maybe we were saying earlier about how like clubs tend to be safer when they go into China, but when they should really do the complete opposite, right? They could be a lot more braver, because we've seen collaborations, it was just last year at New York Fashion Week, between beer brands and fashion brands. Like, that never happens in the West, but it happens in China. So I think
our Shanghai team went to that Yohood event in Shanghai.
Exactly, which is
that's incredible.
Just for the benefit of the audience, maybe you can introduce quickly what Yohood is.
Yohood is basically all different brands going there to resonate with the Gen Z population. So you have rap, you have streetwear, you have food, cool
Beverage, alcohol.
Yeah, cool tea places, bubble teas, markets exploding in China.
If you watch our vlog, for the people listening, a lot of the intro clips are from Yohood.
Watch the vlog.
Do you actually think that, I guess with the rise and popularity of things like rap music, streetwear culture, so you have the sneaker industry and stuff blowing up now in China, that will have a knock-on effect of the growth of certain sports in China?
Yeah, for example, basketball is the biggest in China. It trumps football by a lot of fans, doesn't it, basketball? So, basketball is more easily relatable to streetwear and that sort of rap culture, but I think football will increasingly become that. And the one thing I want to touch on, because we talk about this in all our proposals, is KOLs, key opinion leaders, and it's how at Qumin, because we have offices in Shanghai and in London, we don't just pick up the first influencer, oh, they've got 100,000 followers, let's use them. What we do at Qumin is we find people who are living that life, so that they can easily resonate with the Chinese people. Because in China, KOLs are followed like religiously for their content. So we need to be able to, when we do a proposal for Watford or Harrods or whoever the client is, pick the right person for the job. We don't want to just get someone with, that doesn't matter about the followers, it matters who they are.
Well, authenticity in the football industry is super important, because
you'll get found out.
Yeah, you'll get found out, right? You can't just say, "Oh, I'm a fan of this club," and be paid to say that, which is like most of the KOL industry feels like.
That's a very good point, actually.
It's just like, hey, you take some money and say.
It's crazy how naive these brands are. What are
point.
these big brands that have been called out in China? A lot of them.
It's like you can say if you're like a handbag brand, you can pay influencers to say this is my favorite handbag. Then you'll say the next week this is my other favorite handbag. You can't do that with football. No, you can't be like this is my favorite club.
People go like, what? you clearly are not a football person.
You're not a fan.
You lose all credibility. And so actually you have to kind of like, that's when I think crossing into other verticals it becomes less about I'm a fan of the club, more I'm a fan of the brand of that club. Like I'm more of a fan of what they stand for.
The ethos, as you said.
As opposed to, I know I can name the entire like starting 11 of this particular club. Like, that's often the measure of what's a kind of like a proper fan or a true fan. But then for a lot of these clubs, if they're looking at it from a commerciality point of view, then you need to think of it as a brand and less about I'm trying to build as many fans in China that can name my starting 11.
100%.
You're not. You just want, what you want people to do is say, I know that name of that brand or that company, and I love what they do, and I would subscribe to seeing their content or engaging with them. And then you can take that and go to a sponsor and say, well, look, people love and respect us in China, and we have good reach engagement. Why don't you become a sponsor and we can engage on awesome content that's going to deliver your brand message?
And for a football club, am I right in thinking then that the end goal essentially as a commercial business is to get more sponsors to work with them, and it doesn't matter too much whether they are hardcore football fans or they are fans of the brand and what they stand for as a club?
Of course, you want people through your doors. You want to sell tickets to games. That's what you want.
But Chinese fans can't do that anyway because they're not going to be here.
Of course, yeah. So it is that. It's building the brand, sponsorships, pre-season tours.
Sports. We used to always say that sports marketing was the easiest things to do because the sports fan is the most brand loyal fan you're gonna get.
Yeah.
But that I think that applies, to that. Very, very core audience, the kind of hardcore guys. And like Sean said, there are commercial aspects about gate receipts and ticket receipts, but that's more your UK based audience. You're going to get a bit of a transient kind of population with tourists and things coming over here. but then it's about merchandising, shirt sales, merchandise products, which is a good revenue stream. But then it's TV rights is where the big money comes from, and people are only going to want to watch largely the big games and the big clubs because these guys have the big players, the big stars. So for everybody else, the majority of their money is going to come from sponsorships and partnerships, and that's what's going to keep them kind of going. Everybody's going to already get the broadcast money because the deals are being done by the broadcast authorities and things like that. So
essentially, outside the captured audience of the hardcore fans, the brand really does matter because that's where they get their merchandise, where they get sponsorship deals, and all the peripheral revenue that a club would need. I think it'll be good to lead on to a little bit and go back, I guess, talk a little bit more about Chinese people and the fans. And again, Tom, you talk about the 3 pillars a lot at Qumin here. So those are recognition, entertainment, and respect. Maybe you can just expand on that again for our audience and how we approach that in terms of Chinese fans.
Yeah. So recognition would be, if I'm a club, we're basically communicating to them that you recognize that, yes, they're a Chinese football fan, that they love football, that they're passionate about the game.
But they're different to Western fans.
But they're different, and they express themselves slightly differently. So a good example of recognition would be I got an email this morning from the French Federation, which was wishing me a happy Mid-Autumn Festival, and that was me getting the recognition. I was just like, I'm Chinese. I'm on the mailing list because I signed up when I was in China, when they were doing a campaign with the World Cup, and they were like, okay, well, we're recognizing that you're a Chinese fan, so we're going to send you something for Mid-Autumn Festival.
I know where you're going with this.
Right. In terms of entertainment, like, it was the worst image I've ever seen.
We're gonna actually put the image up on the screen, so those who are watching can have a quick look at it.
You can take a good look. It's got the 2 stars of the 2 World Cups. Well done that France have won. But it was almost. I just recall there was a QR code dumped in the corner and a logo, and then it could have been any sort of image that you download from Shutterstock. So it was. That's not. It's not an entertaining piece of content. Hit the first pillar.
Second pillar.
They recognize. The French Federation have recognized that people in China, like football, and a lot of people there like French football, and they would want to subscribe to getting content. So, then the entertainment pillar of it was you have to recognize that Chinese people want to be entertained in a different way, and that might not be a Sky Sports news type format. It might not be a match of the day type format, right? So a lot of the time, the content that gets created by a lot of people is either 2 broadcasts, which is made for broadcast and it's definitely not made for social, where the majority of Chinese people want to be entertained in short form, quick, innovative formats. But then also within that, the types of things that they're saying are just not that interesting. They're just not that entertaining. It's kind of boring. I don't really, want to see somebody doing calligraphy, like, ever in my life, ever again. Right?
Unless you are a calligraphy master and Chinese.
Even then, I would probably still find it goes over my head, right? But that is the default thing of, it's respectful and entertaining. It's not entertaining, and I don't know why it would be respectful. And then the respect is the last one. So that you almost got to show the Chinese fan that just because you're doing things in a Chinese way, just because I'm putting my Chinese subtitles on it or I'm putting Chinese text on it, that is not respect. Respect is understanding what those people want, taking the time to engage with them a little bit more, on a dialogue perspective, or some community management through some social channels. Or you just show that you're there, you're listening, you're hearing the audience, but then you're also creating content for them. So for me, one of the key things to deliver good sports marketing in China is based around recognition, entertainment, and then respect. So with recognition, it's about recognizing that Chinese fans are super dedicated to the teams that they follow, that they are, really interested in understanding more than just superficial content that's often out there, and drilling really into kind of like the detail, and then building content formats that are local to China. So looking at the different channels that they're on, but also the types of content pillars around just football, and creating content then that spreads across all of those. And naturally then from that, you'll get respect from the Chinese fan, because you're creating content that is made for them, it's made for their channels, and it will allow you to then resonate with them and drive some reaction.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tom. And I think that's a great point to wrap up on. I think this has been a very informative episode, and thank you very much, Sean and Tom, for coming on the show, and we'll have you back sooner than you'd like.
Yeah, cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Arnold.